Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this Answers Special Education Today Facebook Live event. My name is Marni McNiff, and I am the parent-to-parent coordinator at PATH, and I'm also a parent advocate. And Kevin Daly, our usual Answers host, is with me tonight.
Hi, Marni, and welcome everyone. We are here to talk about special education and what to expect next year. Because with summer break rearing its ugly head, it's about time for us to start thinking about the next academic school year. But before we talk about that, I was wondering, Marni, you attend many PPT meetings like I do all through the school year. And well, for me, in many ways, there were some new things this year. What new experiences have you had, Marni? I know you're very experienced. What have you seen this year?
I'm giggling. I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention the new CT SED system that Connecticut, all the school districts are now using for IEPs. And I think the transition was not without hiccups. I feel like I still hear at every PPT, we're still working on this, or we have some trouble with CT SEDs. So I don't think it was a smooth transition as everybody hoped. But, the new IEP, I do feel like for a lot of my clients, they feel like things are a lot more straightforward. So I think ultimately we're going to a good place with the new IEP and then the new system. I don't know that the school people love it yet, but definitely that was one thing that probably came up at every PPT. But I think overall, one big thing is we're back to in-person PPTs. And I know some people still prefer online. It's easier. They can take a lunch break and do a PPT, but I think it's important for parents to know if they want to be in person, they can be now, which, with COVID was a big issue. I think a lot of times people feel like if they're not at the table, they're not really experiencing kind of the vibe of the room and what's going on. So it's been great to be back in person. But I think one of the biggest issues that I've seen, and really for the last 2 years, but this year especially, is a huge increase in the mental health cases that I have. So a lot of PPTs for anxiety, depression, behaviors, way more so than in the past. I've definitely seen a huge uptick with those types of cases. And I do think, some of it is from the pandemic. We have a lot of kids that didn't socialize for a year and a half, and they're getting back to school and they are exhibiting inappropriate behaviors because they haven't been together with other kids. So this was like their first, I thought it was funny the other day when my daughter said to me, my daughter's a senior, and she said, this was my only normal high school year. And I thought about that, and she was right, because they went out March of her freshman year, pretty much, all of her sophomore year was either hybrid or remote. And then even last year, they started with masks and a lot of precautions in place. So this is back to a typical year, so to speak. So I think we're seeing a lot of kids who haven't had that typical setting for the last 2 years are struggling. Gaps in learning, gaps in behavior, things like that. I feel like I've seen a tremendous amount of. How about you? What are some of the things you've seen?
Well, I've seen many of the same things, and for me, returning to in-person PPT meetings, that was a welcome change, even though online attend 3 PPT meetings a day. Yeah. Just doing it all online. Of course, that was the danger for us advocates. We get burnt out, and more than 1 or 2 PPT meetings a day does tend to be quite unnerving. So the first PPT meeting I went to in person for 2.5 years was in September.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and even now, I'd say only about 20% of my PPT meetings are in person.
I would say about the same, maybe even lower in some cases. There, I think we're seeing and at Path so many cases come in, and we are able to help more people. But I'm on one side of Connecticut. If we get a call in Mystic, it's actually really wonderful that I could still attend a PPT and help. But I will say that it's low. It's definitely under that 20 or around that 20% mark that you're mentioning. I'm not in person as often at all.
Although I do enjoy not putting 30,000 miles a year on my car,
Yeah.
Which is something I did for many years.
Yeah.
Now that CT SEDS, that is a challenge for the school people. For us parents, understanding the new IEP and all that's one set of challenges. But for the school people, they've had difficulties, technical difficulties, such as being able to upload documents to the state depository of all the data. They've had all kinds of problems. It reminds me of when Obamacare was first rolled out, 10 plus years ago. The exchange, Connecticut's health insurance exchange, they had lots of problems at first, and so did the federal health insurance exchange. It was a matter of taking care of the technical difficulties rather than the program itself. And I think we're going to see the same thing with CT SEDS. Once these technical difficulties are ironed out, it'll be very different for the school people, and it won't affect parents who are looking for timely delivery of their PPT paperwork and all that. So I'd like to think it's just a matter of time before it improves. And think about it. There are parents now who have never seen the old IEP form. These are parents of students who were first found eligible for special education during this year.
Yes.
So the new IEP form, it's not as new as it used to be.
Right. Right. And I still refer to it as the new IEP form, though. to me, it's always going to be the new one. And it is, I think in a lot of ways, they've tried to make it clearer for parents. They've set it up in a more linear fashion. You have the present levels of performance. You have any testing that has been done in the last test scores, and then you have goals in each area. So for me, I like it better. If I'm looking at reading, for example, I'm looking at all the present levels, I'm looking at the last numbers for testing, and then I'm looking at the goals. So in that respect, I think it's much clearer, and I think it's easier for parents to understand. I mean, you and I are looking at these every day, all day, the testing and things like that. But I think when the new form is easier to understand, at least that's what I'm hearing from parents. They're finding it to have all that information in one spot, the present levels, the testing, and then the goals has been a positive change.
Yeah, and that is a good thing. So it's just a matter of time before things settle out with CT SEDS and it becomes a system that everyone is familiar with and everyone is used to. And
Yeah.
that will be a good thing. And like you, Marni, I've seen a lot of difficulties with students' emotional health this year. More risk assessments than ever before. And let me explain, if you're not familiar with the term risk assessment. A risk assessment is an evaluation. It's considered a special education evaluation. It has to be ordered by a PPT team. The parent has to sign off consent, written consent, just like they would with any evaluation. The purpose of a risk assessment, as the name implies, is to measure the amount of risk there would be for a student who is in the least restrictive environment. And a student with emotional difficulties, a student who would tend to freak out because of the other kids, or the other side of the coin is they may externalize their anxiety with the other kids. There is a way, a set way through a risk assessment to see how much of a risk it would be to keep the child in the least restrictive environment. And that's always the point of special education, to keep children in the least restrictive environment whenever it's appropriate. There are times that it's not appropriate, and there are times when students need to be pulled out to a resource room. Some students need a self-contained program that's like being in the resource room all day.
Right.
And then there are students who need a placement, out of their school district. So that's something that I've seen a lot of this year. A lot of signs of students with mental health difficulties. Also, a lot of students who, this extends beyond school. I've had quite a few clients whose kids have unfortunately gone to the emergency room due to things like attempted suicide, or just anxiety to an extreme.
Right.
And in all of these cases, the children have stayed in the emergency room, some of them for weeks, until an appropriate facility is found for them to go to. Now, a child who is in the emergency room who is on suicide watch is presumed to be safe. They're usually pretty good about that. However, the kind of therapy that it needs to address a condition like that, sometimes that's delayed for weeks. And when help arrives, it may be in the form of a facility that is out of state. I've heard of facilities as far away as Virginia being suggested for some of my kids.
Yeah.
So this is a problem. It's a problem that really existed before the pandemic. It was certainly magnified by the pandemic, but it existed before the pandemic. And suicide was among the top 5 leading causes of death for teenagers and youth for a long time before the pandemic came. And this year in Connecticut, the General Assembly recognized the need to address student mental health, and they passed a $300 million children's mental health bill that provides school districts money that's to be used to support student mental health. I believe that supports students directly, and it shows you how slowly the gears of government can run. This problem has been around for a while.
Yes.
Magnified by the pandemic, but it's something that our legislators have addressed. Some of the money is coming from Washington, which makes it even slower. And before this money finds its way from Washington and Hartford to the school districts, and then to the schools, and then to programs for the kids, it's very, very slow, and too late for a lot of these kids. So in thinking about what school will be like next year, it's safe to say that in this respect, we're probably going to see even more of the mental health crisis that youth are experiencing starting to step up. They have the funds to step up. Many schools are opening a mental health or a health facility for their students. Many of them are in school.
Yes.
So there are signs that this is
with community-based, they're calling community-based health centers, where the students can get therapeutic services right at the school, which I think is a godsend, because there's not as much of help with this. I mean, I think most schools are lacking the amount of support staff needed. Our social workers, our school psychologists, things like that, guidance counselors. I think there's a big need for that. So I've been pleased to see that the community-based health centers are becoming a thing in many schools, which is great.
Yes, it is. And also, I'm starting to see things. For example, one of my kids is in a school district where next year they will be providing a social worker for every school, for every grade in every school.
Oh, wow. Wow.
along with a special education teacher to work with that social worker specifically for students who are having problems with anxiety.
Wow, that's really impressive, actually. I don't think I've had any districts be able to do something like that. So that's amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
And
This is
really needed, truly. I mean, I think, you, as you and I can attest, even 5-10 years ago, the majority of my cases were learning based. Now it's a very high percentage of mental health cases. I mean, I think, we're seeing it so much more. And I think schools aren't always equipped to deal with it. I think I'm seeing one thing that I saw this year that it was new to me was outplacement being proposed for even a student in kindergarten. So I had never seen that before. But I think schools are seeing their limits with what they know how to deal with and things like that. And whether that's the right move or not is very individual, depending on the case, obviously. But I remember thinking that was very new to me, because I had never seen a child so young being discussed for an outplacement.
Yes, it's happening to children of all ages, starting this year. So the thing to remember and how this affects special education students is that many of our children, they already have mental health conditions that are just going to be worsened by the lay of the land and the way that things are right now.
Yeah.
And there are students who have mental health difficulties like anxiety and depression as the result of the challenges that they face,
Right.
where their primary disability may not be linked to emotional health, but it might be autism or a learning disability.
Exactly.
And it causes them to have difficulties like this.
Yes, definitely. So, in looking ahead, we are, we're anticipating the same teacher shortages that we're seeing. I'm sure you've seen as well. I mean, there's, teachers, we're not getting a lot of teachers, a lot of incentives being given out for students going to college, wanting to get into education. And I definitely think that will continue. I will say that, it's been tough for schools to find staff, which means our kids in special education are suffering, because, I had a few in one district where there wasn't a special educator for a little while. So that, obviously those children got compensatory services, but when you have a month or so gap, it really does impact a child. And I think we're going to see those shortages continue until they maybe pay our teachers what they deserve, because they deserve a lot. But I don't think that's going to change for the upcoming year. There's a definite shortage of teachers and special education staff members, our speech pathologists, our OTs, our PTs. Schools are having trouble getting people in those roles.
Yeah, I agree. Recently, the Connecticut Education Association, which is the largest teachers union in the state, they released some figures about the teacher shortage. We started this year with a shortage of about 1,200 teachers in the state of Connecticut. And right now we're facing for next year a shortage of 1,700 teachers. It's not an easy time to be a teacher.
It's not.
Yeah, many of the teachers that are in the profession are thinking of leaving. The CEA in the same release noted that in a poll they conducted, 74% of the current teachers are considering leaving the profession early.
Wow. Well, I think that kind of in some ways goes back to it's not the profession that they wanted to do. Like, their freedom of being able to teach a lesson in a creative way is often limited by the amount of state testing and things like that they have to prepare kids for those tests. I think we also have a lot more of these meetings going on, and teachers are pulled, and it's a lot of work. I mean, it's It's a lot. And I don't know, in many districts, I can say that our teachers are well enough supported in terms of they would benefit from more paraprofessionals, which is another area that is a huge area where we need people. In every district that I work with, there's a big need for paraprofessionals, and those are often the people who are working one-on-one with our kids, or get to know our kids the most. So, and they're key people to our kids' success. Definitely. It's been hard on school systems not having their staff filled to be able to support the kids.
Yes, and just like everything else, the effect is magnified on special education students. The shortage of paras, definitely, many of our children work more closely with their para than they do with their classroom teacher.
Yep.
And without appropriate number of paras available, things like sending a child to the least restrictive environment with a para so that they can stay there, that's kind of been phased out in many schools. Or the lack of a para means that there are substitute paras, one or two new ones every day for some kids, it seems.
And some are being pulled to cover for teachers. I've had that experience a lot, that some of my little ones with a one-on-one, their one-on-one has been pulled in another direction. So that's been tough. I mean, the school has to cover classes, obviously, but if it's in the child's IEP that they have a one-on-one, they're entitled to that one-on-one all day. If that's what their IEP specifies. So I definitely think we have work to do in terms of supporting our school staff and getting the right people in there for sure. It's not going to be an easy task to fill those roles. As you said, 1,700, that's a lot.
It is a lot, and the situation doesn't really help build trust between parents and schools. I'm sure there are parents who suspect that their child is not getting a para because there is no para available. I mean, there is no para written into their IEP because there is no para available.
Right.
It's not a good situation. Now, for the teacher shortage here in Connecticut, in the recent state legislature session, they did pass a bill that would give $3 million to schools to address the teacher shortage. And there are a number of things that can be done. In the teaching profession, though, there is a controversy about how to handle this. Some say that shortening the path to become a teacher is the way to do it. And there are others that say that shortening that path will result in teachers who are less qualified to teach than the current teachers we have. So that's something that has yet to be worked out. But just like in any business, if you want to attract more employees, better pay. That's something that everyone responds to. Yes. And Connecticut is known for not paying teachers as well as they're paid in other states. For example, in Connecticut, the starting pay for a general education teacher is $40,000 a year on the average. In New York State, just crossed the line, and that average starting pay is $60,000.
Big difference.
So that's a difference there. And also working conditions. I think teachers need to feel that they are backed up by the people they work for, by their administrators. And there are so many pitfalls that teachers face now. Just think of the culture wars. I know teachers who have been told not to talk about certain subjects that relate to culture wars. That people get mad about because they'll hear about it from the parents.
Right.
So teachers are effectively muzzled in a lot of ways because of these concerns. And well, I would think twice about going into any career where I have to be muzzled.
Yeah, definitely. So that's it's a concern. And I do, having a child who's a senior, I'm on a lot of the college sites, and you have people saying, don't go into education. It's not what it used to be. But I I think we're all very grateful that there are wonderful teachers working with kids and that are supporting, especially our kiddos with special needs. As I said, I have a senior, and I don't think she'd be where she is today if she didn't have so many wonderful teachers along the way. So definitely one of the most important professions by far, and our paraprofessionals as well. This is so important to all of our kids, really.
Yes, I agree. I agree. And the teachers that I've seen doing incredible things with so few resources, to me, they're heroes. And of course, I've got someone on the inside, my son, who was a special ed student for 12 years. It was the teachers that helped him in school, that helped him get where he is now. And my son, who as a special ed student, when he was struggling, hated to go to school. My son is now an elementary school teacher in another state. But he is experiencing many of the same things that you and I have been talking about. And yet he's not giving up on it. He intends to be a teacher and stay that way. So my kid, who hated going to school, still has to go to school.
But I bet he knows how to inspire those other children that don't necessarily love school because of his own experience.
I'm certain of it.
Yes. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, one thing we wanted to touch on just, before we close with this is looking ahead to next year. And, as we said, there's a lot of kids with anxiety and mental health. And what are some things parents can do to help their kids prepare for the next school year, whether it's a school transition or just a first grade to second grade teacher transition? Those all can bring anxiety to kids. And there are things that we can do to help our kids navigate that transition a little better. One of my dear friends, she has a nonverbal child. And one of the things she did, which I always thought was amazing, is she kind of wrote an about me with a picture and all sorts of details about her child that she really thought it was important for teachers to know, because her child wouldn't be saying those things on his own. So before you even have that first PPT or first team meeting, whatever it may be, the teachers have some information on that child. Another thing that I've always thought was great is if possible, a lot of times staff are back a few days before school starts. If they have open houses and things like that, to at least walk through the school. If time's right, maybe meet the new teacher. But, things like that can really help, bringing your child even to the playground if it's a school transition, a new school, bringing your child to that playground, just getting them familiar with the area, I think can lower anxiety. And definitely if they have a chance to meet some of the staff they'll be working with, or even see their pictures, a social story or something like that, it can really lower anxiety for kids with the transition, because it can be hard. It can be hard transferring to a new teacher, new class. You might not have friends in that class, those things that can really, get a kid nervous.
Definitely. And building a relationship with your child's teacher or teachers, that's very important. As when they're in elementary school and there's one or two teachers, that's one thing. When they get to middle school and there are more teachers than high school, there are even more. I know it takes a lot of legwork for parents to do it, and email can help, but establishing a successful relationship with your child's teachers, it involves getting off to a good start and reaching out. And I suppose that's a soft skill more than anything else. There's nothing in special ed law that addresses this, but this is something that's important to do, and to reduce that anxiety and the transition time that it takes to come back from the summer break or to go to a new building or a new grade. Once you shorten that transition time, there's more progress to be made.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads us into giving a little info on our upcoming meeting, upcoming for August, we'll be discussing that transition back to school and how to help our kids prepare and ways to stay organized and on top of services and what our kids are doing, and if goals are being met and how they're making progress. Ways to do all of that. We will be discussing, date to be decided, but late August, right before the kids go back to school, to give everybody kind of that push to get things started on the right foot.
I hope you can join us for that broadcast. And looking at things in general, wrapping up this year, it's been kind of like World War II in a way. I'm thinking of the pandemic now. The pandemic and everything that we went through during the pandemic, it's still having an effect on education now. The shortage of teachers, the mental health situation, the gap in student achievement, which was even greater for special education students. These things all came out of the pandemic, just like certain things came out of World War II, which influenced the second half of the 20th century. And the pandemic is doing the same thing with education right now, and many other large parts of our lives. But for education, these things that have been set up by the pandemic are still going to exist for a while, and eventually they will be resolved, but it is a matter of time.
Agreed. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and keep posted. We'll keep you posted on our Facebook page and through our social media channels on when that August meeting will be. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
And a great summer. Bye.
Yeah.